Buddy, happy Wednesday. I am so excited to be jumping on here for a cup of coffee with Kristin. I hope you are having a fantastic week. So, we have been kind of doing a series as we've been doing our cup of coffee with Kristin. So, we started with a look at your differential. Last week, we dove into some trivia. So, this week, we are continuing to talk about a dive into your differential. But today, we are now going to our next step, which is talking gears, which I'm actually going to make this a two-part series about gears in your Jeep. Then we're going to be moving over to carriers and talking about specific differential types like a locker or a limited slip differential or an open differential. So for today, I just want to say welcome to A Cup of Coffee with Kristin, where we're going to be taking our coffee and caffeine break, but also be diving into Jeep education and knowledge together. So, welcome. Hello, Sonia from Georgia. I love it. All right. So, I'm going to dive right in and get started for today because I try to keep these super short cup of coffee with Kristin like you would a coffee break. So, we're going to say 15 to 30 minutes. My goal is to always keep them under 30 minutes. So I want to dive right in and get started with you amazing ladies today. So today, I'm going to get small for a minute so you can see because I'm going to be talking about gears. So I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about, but I'm still here in the corner. Hello, everybody. Okay. So today we are diving right in for gear talk. So a focus in on gears in your Jeep. And like I said, I'm going to make this a two-part series just because there is so much to cover, so much to dive into together. I don't want to be on here for hours all at once because when we really start talking about gears, there's a lot to go into. So we're going to be doing a two-part series. So for today, we're going to be beginning to talk about gears and your Jeep. So excited. I get so many questions about gears, re-gearing. I feel like it's so important that we dive into this together. So last week, we talked about your differential. We took a look at the differential, a look at inside the differential. We talked about why it is so important, what is so special about your differential. So now we're diving into, as you can see in this, the ring gear. We are diving into the gears as part of our cup of coffee with Kristin. So, when we talked about your differential, it is important because it houses your gears. Our gears are so important for so many different reasons. So, our differential is crucially important because it houses some really important parts and pieces in there. Then, this week, we are diving in even further looking at this open differential and talking about those gears that are housed inside your differential. So if you are new, hello, I'm Kristin DeLibra from LadyJeepers.com. I help Lady Jeepers, so women who own Jeeps, to safely enjoy their Jeeps on the trail and design their Jeep so that they confidently create a life of adventure without fear. That is the goal. We want to be living our best life and enjoying every moment of it. So I already see you amazing ladies are doing this. Let me know where you are watching from as you are jumping on here with us today. So hello, Diane from Florida. We got Shay from New York, Sonia from Georgia, Jody from Texas. Hello. Sarah from North Carolina. So as you're jumping on here, drop in the comments. Let me know where you are watching from with us today. Excuse me. And a reminder, I am going to be going through this kind of quickly just because I think of this as our 15, 30-minute coffee break. So we're going to pick one specific aspect to dive into together today. And today is beginning to talk about gears in your Jeep. So why does the axle type matter. Why does that play a part in this? We started to talk about it last week, and here, like we showed you last week, we compared so you could see the difference in actual axles side by side comparison. So not only is the axle housing different and the differential different. So not only is it a different size, but inside that differential and that housing based on the axle type are your gears. The size of the axle directly affects the size of your gear set. So when you are looking at this, we're going to dive in just a second, but when you're looking at this, you're going to notice the differential on the left is out of an M220, so we're going to call that a Dana 44 equivalent. Then on the right, you're going to see this is a 1-ton axle, so you're going to notice the different shape in the actual differential, but you're also going to notice that ring gear is a different size. And you might be thinking like, okay, it's a different size based on what gear set is in it. Yes, that is true, but it's also a different size based on that actual axle and differential itself. So you may be asking, what is, when we talk about gears, what are the gears we're talking about? So what we are talking about is your ring and pinion gear. So your ring gear, it looks like a ring. It's kind of the big complete circle. It is your ring gear. Then your pinion gear is what looks kind of like a shaft, and on the end of it, there are some teeth. That is your pinion gear. So as you can see in this picture, when we talk about gear sets, like when we are talking about re-gearing your Jeep, getting a new gear set, going to a different gear ratio, what we are talking about is replacing. So taking out the ring and pinion that are in that differential right now, you take them out and you're going to replace them with a new set or a new ring and pinion gear. Those teeth work together. So like we talked about when we showed pulling the cover off of the differential, inside there you have your ring gear and then you have your pinion gear that is actually going to be coming in the front side that meets that ring gear, and those teeth line up just like in this picture, and as they spin they move together. So when we're talking about the size of your ring and pinion gear, the size of your ring and pinion gear is important because that directly affects the size of your teeth, the number of your teeth, the strength of your teeth. So when you are thinking about re-gearing, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about actually going in, pulling the cover off the differential. You can see the ring gear because, again, the pinion gear is coming in from the front. So think of it as coming in from the front into, that is where the location is going to be. So you're not going to be able to see it from this back side when you take the cover off, but no, you can see the big ring gear. And if you get up in there and look, if you get really close, you can see the pinion gear that lines up to that ring gear. So when you go to re-gear, in a nutshell, open the differential, axle shafts have to come out so that you can then remove the ring and pinion gear because everything works together inside that differential so that when you hit the gas and your tires start to move, there's a process that everything has to go through mechanically, hitting gas, tires moving. One of those processes is that power coming in through your pinion gear, then turning because of the teeth and the way that they touch, ring and pinion gear moving, sending power out through the axle shafts, which are inside this differential as well, and spinning the tires. So I get questions. This is why I wanted to dive into this today. I know it's a lot of mechanical and tech today, but I feel like it's so important because it's one thing to have people say, hey, you need to re-gear your Jeep if you're going to bigger tires. So you could go into a shop and you could say, I need to re-gear my Jeep because I'm going to bigger tires. And I was told if I go to bigger tires, I have to re-gear my Jeep. right? Nothing wrong with that. Or you might be like me, and you might say, okay, well, why do I regear? And what does that mean? What do you mean regear? So that's why I wanted to jump into this first part with you today to focus on gears. And when we're talking about gears, because we hear people talk about them so much. And if you are just starting out or maybe just starting to build your Jeep, you might be like, I have people all the time tell me, you need to re-gear, or you need to get a new gear set, or you need a different gear ratio based on the tire size that you're going to. What in the world does that mean? So that's what today is all about. Diving in to talk about, what does that mean? What does it mean when people say to you, you need to re-gear because of your tire size? Or if you're going to a bigger tire size, you need a different gear ratio. Or what does that mean? That's what we are looking at. And I feel like it's important. So if you want to know and understand why and what that means, that's what we are diving into. So when we talk about a gear ratio, the gear ratio, we're going to dive into in depth next week. We're going to go in depth to different gear ratios, what gear ratio you need to look at based on the tire size that you're getting. Today, I wanted to really highlight what the gears are so that you understand as we go to the next step and start talking about what is the right gear ratio. So a gear set is your ring and pinion gear, and it's based on the gear ratio. If you re-gear, you are taking out the old ring and pinion gears, putting in a new ring and pinion gear set at the new gear ratio. So basically, all three of those are basically saying the same thing. To re-gear, to change your gear ratio, to upgrade your gear ratio, to all of those things are all the same thing. It is all talking about this ring and pinion gear. Now, what I do want to talk about today, why we started to dive into and talk about the axles, is based on the size of the axle that you have, that's going to determine the shape and the size of your differential. And then inside there are your gears. So that is directly going to affect what size ring and pinion gear you are starting with. So for example, if you have a Dana 30, your ring and pinion gear size is going to be one size. So I'm just so you can see, this is not the actual size, but I'm doing it so you can see on the camera. Okay, so you have the Dana 30. This is your ring gear size. Now let's say you have a Dana 44 axle. That means your ring gear size, so ring and pinion size, is now a little bigger. Then if you go to a Dana 60 or a 1-ton equivalent axle, that ring gear size has gotten bigger. Why does that matter? What that means is based on what axle you have, that is going to determine your starting size in these ring and pinion gears. So just think of it this way: bigger axle, bigger ring gear, bigger ring and pinion gear set to start with. Because whether you have a Dana 30, a Dana 44 equivalent, so like this M210 on the picture on the left, or a Dana 66, a Dana 60, or a 1-ton equivalent, like in this picture on the right, you're going to notice the size of those gears is different. Even if, this is what I want to talk about today, even if you were to re-gear, so change the gear ratio, change the ring and pinion gear set in that differential. So let's say we had a Dana 30, Dana 44, and a Dana 60 all next to each other. They're all going to be re-geared to a 456 gear set. We will get into the numbers next week in depth, I promise. This is important though. This is why you might hear people say, oh, well, you have a Dana 30. You shouldn't re-gear to a 488 or a 513, or you have a Dana 44. You shouldn't go any deeper than a 513. The reason you're going to hear that, the explanation behind that, when you have these three axles sitting next to each other with the diff covers off, just like these two right here. Pull everything out. You're going to put a 456 gear set. So you're re-gearing both of these axles, same gear set. They're both getting a 456. The ring and pinion gear for the axle on the right in the 1 ton is going to be bigger than the 456 ring and pinion gear in the axle on the right. So again, if you had a Dana 30 sitting next to it, that ring and pinion gear is going to be even smaller, even though all 3 axles or all 3 Jeeps are re-gearing to the exact same gear set of 456. That is their new gear ratio. We're going to pretend like they all got new gears. So they're all the same ratio, but the size of the actual ring and pinion gear is different. So bigger the axle number, the bigger the ring and pinion gear is to start with. So a 456 gear setup and a 1 ton axle is going to be a larger ring and pinion gear than a 456 setup and a Dana 30. There'll be a size difference there in the actual gear set themselves. Why does that matter? As your gear ratio number gets bigger, the ring and pinion gear gets smaller. So that means you're going to have less contact surface with the teeth. Oops, I went the wrong way. Oh, I went way too far. Sorry, ladies. I jumped all over it. Okay. So when we're looking at how we talked about, you have your ring gear, your pinion gear, they touch, the teeth line up, they move, they have to hold. You might hear people talking about issues like breaking teeth off of their gear set. That's what they're talking about. So those teeth that are in there, there's teeth on the ring gear, there's teeth on the pinion gear. They grab, they hold, they move, they work together. As your gear ratio number gets bigger, so 410, 456. Now the ring and pinion gear gotten smaller. 488, smaller. 513, ring and pinion gear have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller as that gear ratio number gets bigger. So why am I telling you all this today? Because you may hear somebody say, like you might say, I have a Dana 30. I want to be going to a 37 and I want to re-gear to 488s. And someone might say to you, oh, that's a little too deep or a little too much for that axle. Part of that is because as the ring and pinion gear gets smaller and smaller and smaller, you're going to have less surface of teeth. So instead of having these bigger, wide teeth, as it gets smaller, you're going to have less surface for those teeth to grab and to move. As they get smaller, your ring and pinion gear get weaker. So when you are talking about, again, looking at the axles, Dana 30, Dana 44, Dana 60, all next to each other. As the numbers get bigger, so let's say I want to go to 37s, I want to re-gear to a 488, and I'm all excited about it. The 488 gear set, because remember, bigger the number, smaller the ring and pinion gear. In a Dana 30, that is going to be smaller than that same 488 gear ratio set in a Dana 44. It's going to be a little bit bigger because it's a different axle. And they'll be a little bigger in the Dana 60 or a 110 equivalent because it's a little bigger. So the idea is you don't want the weakest part to be your ring and pinion gear or your gears. It's important that they're able to have enough surface to be able to grab, have enough teeth to bite, to be able to move and function properly and correctly and hold up and have strength. So that, in a nutshell, when we're talking about what is re-gearing, what does it mean to re-gear? What does it mean if we change out our gear ratio? In a nutshell, that is exactly what that process is. Removing an old ring and pinion gear, replacing it with a new one at a different gear ratio, which we're going to go over next week. But I want you to have that understanding that That ring and pinion gear, as the gear ratio number goes up, the ring and pinion gear gets smaller. So based on what axle you're starting with, that also determines your starting size for your ring and pinion gear. So in a nutshell, that is, when we talk about re-gearing, what it is, how it works, what happens, this ring gear and this pinion gear, how important they are, but you also know what they look like, where they're located, how they function together, and understanding your starting point of the size of your ring and pinion gear based on your axle. And then as you re-gear and change those out, so you take them out, the bigger number gear ratio you're putting back in, the smaller ring and pinion gear you're putting back in. That is why you hear a lot of people say, ooh, don't go that deep, don't go that low, which means a bigger number, in that axle, because that ring and pinion gear is so small at that point. That's what people are talking about. So I know that was kind of a lot of mechanical, and tech in a very short period of time. But I want to make sure we talked about that before we jump in for next week, because next week we're going to be diving into re-gearing, just re-gearing. Again, trying to keep these 30 minutes or less. So let's talk about re-gearing a little bit. What would you re-gear your gear size to? So you're going to re-gear. Take that ring and pinion gear out, replace it with a different gear set, gear ratio. What would you re-gear to? Here's what plays a part in that and what dictates what gear ratio you're going to re-gear your Jeep to. One, it is based on tire size. So the bigger the tire, the bigger the gear ratio needs to be to increase, to keep the balance, and be able to properly turn those tires with the bigger tire size on there. Also, if it's an automatic or a manual, that can play a part in what you re-gear the gear ratio to. The generation of the Jeep, so the year of the Jeep, can play a part in that as well, depending on what motor is in it, depending on what year it is. That will play a part when you start talking about gear ratios and what to re-gear to. And then the use and the purpose of the Jeep plays a big part in what you want to re-gear to. If you want a daily driver that's going to be great on road, you're going to take it on long trips, you're going to travel, you want it to have good road manners, you want it to drive great uphills on the interstate, high speeds, you're going to re-gear with that in mind. If you said this is a purpose-built Jeep to take trail riding, so I want absolute trail performance, but I don't care what it drives like on the road, then you may re-gear to a different gear ratio based on that for that Jeep. So there are factors that play a part into what you want to re-gear to. I know there's kind of general numbers. So like, when you're talking about 35s, you're going to hear 410s or 456s. When you start talking about 37s, you're going to hear 488s. So there's some kind of general numbers that go with tire size, but from there you can tweak it a little bit. So not only is it based on tire size, it could be based on if you have an automatic or a manual. If you want a little more on-road or off-road performance, which direction do you want to go with it? Because we can really start to customize how our Jeeps perform, how they drive, and where we are getting our maximum benefit based on those factors right there. And that's what we'll dive into in depth next week. We'll start talking about gear ratios. We'll talk about tire size, purposes, what to re-gear to, how to decide what to re-gear your Jeep to. That will be in depth next week because that is its own full class. So we're going to be diving into that together next week. And then the following week, we will dive into our carriers and our differential types, talking about limited slip, lockers. So I'm trying to divide it up because for me, when we start really looking at diving into like the mechanical side, really talking kind of about the mechanics, parts understanding, especially when we're talking about gears. There's so many different parts to that, especially if we're talking about re-gearing. So we're kind of going step by step. So we looked at the differential. We looked at the differential without the diff cover, talked about why the differential is so important, what lives inside of it. Today, we went more in depth and started looking at what is a gear when we're talking about this, looked at the ring and pinion gear, and then talked about how the axle size directly affects the size of the ring and pinion gear. Next week, we'll go in depth a little bit more into the size of the gear ratio, how that affects the gear set, and then dive into what is the best gear ratio to re-gear to for your Jeep. I'm going to share with you today, and I'll say it again next week, and I'll probably say it the following week. Yes, you need to re-gear your Jeep. I have that question come in all the time. I was told I don't need to re-gear my Jeep, or if I go to 35s, I don't need to re-gear my Jeep. Sometimes, like especially in these newer generations with different transmissions in them, you can go a little bit longer without re-gearing. But long-term longevity, long-term drivability, I am a firm believer. If you go to a bigger tire size, you need to re-gear so that your Jeep is happy. Now, if you order one of the amazing Rubicon Recons directly from Jeep, you can get a 456 gear package with a 35-inch tire and you're done. That is re-geared. So there are options, but I always tell everyone, yes, you need to re-gear long term. You're not going to be happy with how your vehicle drives if you do not re-gear. You're not going to be happy on trips. Doesn't matter. Long term, yes, you need to re-gear. Yes, you need to re-gear. And yes, you need to re-gear. And yes, you need to re-gear. So if someone tells you you don't, again, that's personal opinion, but mechanically, from a mechanic standpoint, there are variances and there are, let's just say, like acceptable variances. So based on a tire size, there's gear sets that are a variable that are considered acceptable. Within that, I always say you don't want to be at the low end. You want to be at the happy end where your Jeep's going to be the happiest. So can you put a 35 on with 410 gears? Like if you have a Rubicon with 410s, can you put 35s on it without re-gearing? Yes. Do you want it to live like that for 5 years? No, because eventually you do still want to re-gear because your drivability is going to change. So we're changing to match the changes we have made. Think about it that way. Think about Legos. I know I did a blog post that Jeeps are Legos for adults. And it really is. Imagine Jeep has made this Jeep Lego set. Okay. It's all put together and you get it. Well, when you change one thing, you need to then adjust so everything stays together and is structurally sound. Exact same idea with your Jeep. When you change out, let's say, take off stock tires, put on big tires. There are changes that you're going to have to make to keep the balance, the drivability, and the integrity of how the vehicle was set up and designed from the beginning. That ultimately is what we are doing. Honestly, we are replacing stock parts, I'm going to say, with higher quality upgrades. But as you do that, think of a balance. Think of one thing like science, right? Cause and effect. So if we change something, there's a cause and effect there. Now we have to try to counteract and balance. That is all this is bigger tires, counteract and balance. We need to re-gear. We need different wheels and offsets or wheel spacers, right? We need a little lift for clearance. All of this is depending on what Jeep you have. They're all a little different. But, there's balances that we have to make to accommodate. So think of everything as cause and effect, balance. We're trying to keep the integrity. So if this plus this equals this, it has to stay that way, right? When we change one thing, we got to adjust so we're still at that equals. We're not positive or negative one way or the other. We want balance. That's all we're striving for. That is all a great Jeep build is. Sorry, I went a little off target there today on that one. Yes, like Jody said, if you live in Texas, they'll tell you not to re-gear, but don't listen to them. Just because you live in a state that is mostly flat, Florida, see, to me, Texas isn't totally flat though, Jody, because like there's off-road parks, there's hills. I know there's not big mountains, but regardless of if you were out like in the plains, right? Doesn't matter because you still want your vehicle to be happy. You still want to have high speed. You still want it to pull off the line. You want to be able to pull out in traffic if you need to. You want to be able to make it up a hill if you take it on a trip. You want, as balanced gas mileage as you can get. All of those things play a part. And re-gearing is what helps to balance all those things. So let's see. Shay said, I'm happy to catch you on this subject. I'm at this point deciding what I'm going to do. I have 410s now. I think 488s will be my next step. Question mark. Shay, if you're going to a 37, then yes, 488s. Jody, I agree. You do have a lot of different terrain in Texas. So I don't 100% understand why that shop in particular didn't think you needed to re-gear. Because again, think of it, charts, science. Yes, there's opinions, but honestly, there's charts and there's science, and then there's cause and effect of that as well. So that you can look up like what happens if I don't re-gear my Jeep? Gas mileage is going to go down. You may notice that the temperature of the vehicle starts to go up because the vehicle's having to work harder because the gears are not the correct ratio to be helping to move those bigger tires, which then means your transmission and engine are having to do more work. So you may notice temperature increase. You may notice your transmission is not happy. Like you're trying to go up a hill and it's like downshift, upshift, downshift, upshift, downshift. Can't seem to find where it wants to be. All of those things play a part in it. So let's see. Jody said, all I know is the build we did is amazing on the highway. Whoop, whoop. I'm still shocked at how much better she handles. I love that. So Jody was one of our amazing build concierge ladies who had Lady Jeepers help her build her Jeep. And she has a great setup and absolutely re-geared. So I'm so happy that you are happy with how it is driving on the road. I can't wait to see it in a couple weeks. So excited, Jody. I can't wait. We get to put it through its paces again into the test. I know I saw it before, but now we get to push it a little more testing with it. All right, Shay said, I'm not doing extreme trails. I already have 37s. I stopped at this point. Okay, so Shay with 37s, I would recommend 488s. That's going to be a great spot for you to be. So kind of a quick overview. We're going to go more in depth into this next week. But while we're on here and talking about it, what you normally long-term, can a Jeep Rubicon with 410 gears live on 35s or even 37s and drive around? Yes. Is it going to be happy? No. So the longer you drive it like that, the higher risk you are of damaging other things, putting too much stress on other parts and pieces that are accommodating. So kind of in a nutshell, 35s, you want to go to a 456, 37s, 488. Those are kind of the sweet spots. Now, if you say, I want a trail rig, you're going to adjust it. Or if you say, I have a manual, then you would ask some questions. You may adjust it. Sometimes you want to gear a manual just one deeper for your trail riding benefit so that your stall point changes. There's so many different things to look at. Let's see. Janine said 2004 LJ was fine with the 3.73 gears for a while. I've had 33s on the Jeep for a few years with the stock gears. I'm going to 456. Can't wait to feel the difference. Woohoo! You're going to feel a huge difference there. Huge difference, Janine. And you're a manual, correct, Janine? I believe so. Now you are going to lose a little bit of top speed. So like you may not be able to run as fast going to the 456, but yes, you are absolutely going to feel a difference. Shay, what a great way to do it. She said that's why she's redoing everything now and getting better parts. Oh, Janine, you're an automatic. Are you thinking about going to 35s eventually, Janine? Because I would say if you're going to go to 35s, maybe eventually, then yes, re-gear to 456s. So you're ready to go. I'll see what she has to say. A 410 for your 33s. You're not going to lose as much drivability on the road and top speed. So possibly, if there's a possibility, absolutely re-gear to 456 because you know you're going to go to 35s. If you say maybe, you're probably going to go to 35s. So, all right, ladies, I went a little over my 30-minute mark today, but I feel like when we start talking about gears, it's so important to jump in. So this is a little different than like our build educational classes where, we really dive in and go through the gears, talk about everything at once. For these cup of coffee with Kristin, I'm trying to keep them a little shorter. So I'm taking the whole gear training and breaking it into smaller pieces. So today is part 2, and we're talking about gears. Next week is part 3, and we're going to be talking about gear ratios, how to decide what gear ratio is the best for you, really diving into that side of it. Then the following week, which will be our part 4, we're going to start looking at carriers, which is what is in there with your gears, how they all work together, and then talk about different differential types like a locker, an open differential, or your limited slip. Then that is our series for our differentials and our gears. Oh, thank you, Shay. All right, ladies, don't forget, next week, mark your calendar, jump on with me. So every Wednesday, oops, I have so many slides on here. I'm sorry, ladies. Oh, don't forget. See, this is why I have slides on here. I forget stuff. Don't forget, we have our Driving Towards Confidence workshop that is coming up, 2-day workshop. You can jump over to ladyjeepers.com, get all the information, see everything we're going to be doing, or drop the word workshop in the comments, and I will shoot you all the information. We're going to be going through a lot of goodness together over those 2 days. Mark your calendar every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. We jump on right here. We pick one specific Jeep aspect to dive into. So we're kind of, we're taking everything and breaking it up into little bite-sized pieces to make it easy to learn, to understand, and to jump on so that you can have your coffee break and get your Jeep knowledge on at the same time as well. So thank you, ladies. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Can't wait to see you next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. when we dive into our next specific aspect, which is going to be, how do I stop sharing? There we go. Talking about gears, part 2. So gear ratios, understanding all of that, and what questions to ask, how to decide what to re-gear your Jeep to. Woohoo! So excited. Spring is around the corner. Jeep weather is almost here. So I want to make sure you are ready, prepared, and set up for Jeep season when it gets here. So thank you again, ladies. Have a fantastic rest of your day, rest of your week, and I will see you again when we dive in, talk some more gears. So thank you again, ladies.